Hi everyone, welcome to Ollie Talks. I'm your host Sri Krishna, and today we have with us an exciting guest. Ankit Bhardwaj is the principal architect and head of product development at Allbound, with a remarkable track record of driving 60% cloud cost reduction and achieving 99% uptime while scaling applications for 25x more traffic. Ankit has proven to be a true innovator in the field of app modernization and cost consolidation. So let's dive into his journey and explore how what it took to reach such heights. Welcome to our podcast, Ankit.
Hi,
Hi.
thanks for having me
So
here.
glad to have you here as well. So, Ankit, to start things off, right? So, you've had quite an interesting journey. You started off from being a PLSQL developer to leading a product development at Allbound. Can you share some highlights of your career and how you've how you adapted your skill set to meet current present day demands?
Oh yeah, uh, so uh, so I started back in 2014 as PL SQL developer, and I used to work for service sector. So, uh, it was deep rooted in terms of I had a lot of fear of missing out. That's why I decided to move towards a more modern technology that leans more into full stack development. I always have this, uh, you know, desire to be building something out that can be seen, touch, or felt, which means the application should be UI oriented, has to be backed by a API or things like that. But being a PLSQL developer doesn't offer a lot in terms of the real exposure towards how the application behaves. So I really, out of just FOMO, I self-taught myself Angular JS and some of the other backend technologies like Node.js and at a very rudimentary level. And I was able to, fake it until I made it into a first job where I was able to crack a full stack role at a very entry level into a product company. And that is where the real journey began in terms of understanding the nuances of product development and delivery. So I started with a full stack development there, but very soon after that, I moved into full life cycle engineering, which essentially meant that I was able to expose myself to things like containerization of applications and then deployment on cloud, deployment on on-premise systems. Also was able to expose to some of the open source uh, madness that was going around, things like Kubernetes and all of these things, right? So that was my exposure there in terms of full life cycle engineering, and it helped me really make a move into the startup that I'm working at this point. So in 2019, one of my mentors decided to move to this startup, and that's how I went here. And then after that, it's because when you join a startup at a very entry level, this company was transitioning from a phase of being a marketing agency. So in US, marketing agencies do things on a case to case basis, things like that, but it was transitioning into a pure product based model. So there was a lot in terms of transitional things happening, fundings coming around, and then more traffic anticipated and things like that. So that is where one of the first things that we wanted to transform here was to modernize this application stack, which was completely built out on legacy and some of the post legacy frameworks. But you could imagine it was built out in the legacies of WordPress and PHP. So it was pretty legacy in those terms. So that the first thing that we wanted to do was to modernize the application towards a more single page website kind of architecture, and along with that we wanted to go to service oriented architecture for our backend, right? And one of the things, because I brought a expertise of containerization and container orchestration from my previous job, so first thing that we did was containerize all of our application stack. Then we deployed our application stack to Kubernetes. We had a lot of in-house open source CI/CD experience using Jenkins and all. So I built out like a whole array of Jenkins plugins of my own. So I was able to deploy all of those here, and then we set up like a pretty modern CI/CD pipeline, if I must say, which used to take care of uh, rapid releases. Because once you move from a product company, like my previous product company was into AV domain, So they used to build out software on top of a hardware. Those kind of software releases are pretty slow because you don't have to release software releases on top of hardware every week or something, right? But once you move into a purely web-based product model, that's where the rapid go-to-market strategy kicks in, where every week something has to be released to production to keep your customers engaged, especially in SaaS. So that's what that was basically a requirement for us then, to have a pretty modern CI/CD pipeline in place that used to take care of these rapid releases, and also back those up with very nice Dora matrices. So we wanted to ensure stability and throughput, both. So yeah, that was the setting up of all of those early phases of application modernization. But again, once you modernize your application at first level, then again the other things kicks in after that. So the next thing was to ensure the better security posture. um, After that, once the application was scaling, the team also naturally scales up. So a lot of people are contributing to a single code base, and that's how you also need to ensure that the product releases cannot now move from a week cadence to 2 week cadence, right? We have to ensure that it'll still be, it still has to go on a faster pace. So that's where I strategized, dividing the larger legacy technology team into more functional work stream oriented teams, where we basically, in the first phase, containerized and orchestrate, containerize and put our application on Kubernetes. The second phase was naturally to also think about domain segregation, which
Mm-hmm.
means in the application there was a specific domain that belonged to a specific team. uh, and that's how we ensured that teams were independently developing then, and then also releasing independently. So there's not a lot of dependency.
Right.
But again, anything that is dependent was moved to another team called platform team. So platform team we have built from, with a very nuanced approach. It was not like a typical platform team which is only responsible for operational efficiency. It was also something that we have utilized for digital transformation. So all of our REST API frameworks to gRPC frameworks, anything that was common code base, even the common business logic, belonged to the platform team's wheelhouse. And that's how it got utilized into different teams and all.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, like after that, it's pretty much the similar kind of model. And again, in the startup, there are events always happening. Startups receive funding, startups decide to join other startups and things like that. So, very recently, I am taking care of a large scale technology merger, which is now, my responsibility is to join two clouds. But again, like, this also comes with its own journey, right? You just do not decide
Right.
to on the first day join two clouds. First is that you also trim down your existing cloud, then see best of the both worlds, and then ultimately decide to join two clouds. So recently I'm taking care of you know moving most of our regions into a single region, and then from that single region we'll merge two regions. Is the future prospect at this point. So yeah, that's how it is going at this point of time. And
Mm-hmm.
again, in terms of application modernization, again it opens gates to application modernization, because when you decide to merge two products from a same industry, then there is a lot of scope of modernizing the application so that they have the same design language and the product language for the customers. So yeah,
Right.
that's pretty much in terms of the overall journey on how I started, where we have landed so far.
I mean that's pretty amazing, Ankit. And I can actually see the amount of transition that you've had to, push yourself to do to, stand by the roles or responsibilities that were given to you. But of the lot of projects that you mentioned, considering all of them have been done independently and at one project at a time, what would you say has been the most challenging project, and how did you overcome that?
See, like, definition of challenge in my view at least always comes from the things that you achieve when everything is sorted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, fixing up or improving a happy scenario is always difficult because the things are already wired up in the right places, right? And you are always anxious about breaking some of these connections whilst you are doing something. So, although I have done things from scratch a lot, which were very challenging in terms of implementation, but I'd say the most challenging recent projects that I have done was the merging of two regions into one. The reason is because there is a lot of regional dependency in terms of customer sys compliance and security. And then because every region has its own customer base, the volumes of data, volumes of requests floating around and things like that. And then of course applications evolve over time. So especially in our case, when we were merging the legacy region into the more modern region that we have provisioned, which modern region, of course, we have provisioned with a lot of security posture related nuances in mind. When we decided to merge these two, uh, one of the greater challenge was because the other region was legacy. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of you know everything ugly has stayed there, right? And we have to move all of the ugly, deciding not to make the existing or the more wholesome region uglier. So that was more challenging in terms of implementation and strategy, right? So I'd say one of the very simpler cases, when you decide to make the applications first time, and I'm talking about pre-application modernization era for our application. So it was basically like bunch of you know instances, a bunch of compute instances standing up on cloud, and then we put it on like a public net, and then we have spun up like a load balancer on top of it, spun up a auto scaler on top of it, and then basically wired it up on our DNS, and then that's how we were running our application, right? But when we decided to modernize, then the things has changed. Now the applications are running inside containers. Those containers are running inside compute scale on their own, container scale on their own, using auto scaling strategies and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have databases also. So the post modernization era, everything was on public net. Even the databases were on public net. So once we moved from that phase to the application modernization phase, a lot of it we moved to private net, a lot of it we moved to service mesh based technologies, and we optimize the internet traffic, right? Between subnets.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the things stayed on public net, right? Like databases and all. And you cannot decide to migrate your database one day without causing service disruption. So one of the challenges that I gave my team was to, during this entire regional migration, we didn't want to do any, we didn't want to take basically any kind of downtime, not even a single minute.
Mm-hmm.
So that was basically the core piece of strategy, that how we would be able to do it. So in theory, if you think about it, migrating two regions or like merging two regions should be easier, like take like a week's downtime, and
Mm-hmm.
then basically run all the backups from this region to that region.
Mm-hmm.
But once the services are running, once you have a lot of paying customers, especially in SaaS, there is a lot of customization done by your customers.
Right.
So, and those customizations are also very regionally dependent. So, a lot of these customizations were with our legacy customers, and that
Mm-hmm.
was the region that we were moving. So, there was a lot of stakeholders also involved. So, my point of saying is that anything that is running, anything that is wired up, even the uglier way it is wired up, anytime you take care of that kind of project would be more complex and more stressful for you and your team.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, in my opinion, even any kind of complexity that comes with a newer kind of project where you're building stuff from scratch is much easier. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's the more recent one that I say is more complicated.
Right, right. So, I mean, if you were to kind of advise or give your thoughts on what would be the best practices to approach such a situation where you've already moved on from a legacy ecosystem to a more modern ecosystem, and now you're just trying to optimize it to ensure it is scalable yet in a sustainable way for, to meet top line and bottom line goals. How would you go by advising people around this, or what would be your approach? What should
So
be the structure?
my approach, as in from moving from legacy to
No,
modern stack.
To once all that is done, to modernize an already good
Mhm.
ecosystem, how should companies go by this? What should be their thought process like? What should be their mindset, their team alignment, all of them?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll talk about the things that have worked for me. But again, these things are very nuanced and work very differently industry to industry as well. In my case, I was dealing with a fairly scaled up SaaS
Mhm.
platform. Okay, with a lot of paying customers. So at any point in time when you decide to optimize the system, it is one mindset is always has to be clear is that optimization is something that is not sold to customer as a feature. So customers are never going to get it if they are facing any kind of jitter because of your optimization efforts. So it has to be very stealth based.
Mhm.
So uh, you don't have to set up a very aggressive goal for yourself when you are deciding to optimize or taking care of these kind of migrations that ultimately optimizes the system. Always move progressively in terms of keeping the current versions running as it is
Mhm.
and utilize a lot of available infrastructure and a lot of technologies available, especially the networking technologies is something that shines up the most in these kind of scenarios where partially move some of your traffic to the newer version and keep the older version running intact with all the DNS configurations and everything. In our scenario, a lot of things we have not touched on the application side. So we are all also be careful about not changing application code to support migrations or optimizations a lot, especially if it is not directly related to business logic or that kind of domain segregation, right? So I'll talk about an example. In a lot of places, when we were moving our API is also multi-tenant, right? So a lot of our customers have moved already to the newer version, and the way they are approaching that traffic is by header-based, cookie-based routings that we have done on the load balancers configuration, not really onto the application configuration, because you're always at a risk of introducing newer, more nuanced things on the application side if you are, doing platformsy stuff on the application. So that's the another thing that I'd say.
Mhm.
Another thing is, whenever you are doing these kind of things, rely a lot on the data and the transitional data that goes along
Right.
with that. So your matrices from your APM systems, application performance monitors, study a lot of telemetry to understand how the system is behaving, and then plan your capacity accordingly. And then again, this is again a mindset that I have seen could differ from a uh, could differ between an individual who is purely a site reliability based background
Mhm.
and purely different in case of a software developer. So a software developer always try to solve a problem using code and all, right?
Mhm.
And a site reliability engineer always has a tendency to suggest more infrastructure bumping, vertical scaling or horizontal scaling scenario. So it doesn't have to be that kind of black and white.
Mhm.
When you're relying heavily on the telemetry and study of the existing data, that is where you'll have a lot of windows through the system sold to improve how and where you really need to put effort and where you really need to wire up more infrastructure, so introduce newer cost, and where you really need to introduce more people cost in terms of developing in-house or maybe buying out a subscription from outside, things like that.
Right.
So yeah, like long story short, study of the data actually tells you a lot in terms of what decisions you could make.
Right.
And always rely on that. Even in the transitional phases, it's not an afterthought. It is something that you have to do right then and there. Some of the things when you're optimizing the system is not because optimization is, in my view, it's anyway operational efficiency thing.
Right.
Okay, it is going to impact in the longer run, and it's not going to bring net new revenue.
Mhm.
Obviously directly, right? It's kind of like an intangible benefit. So if the company is prioritizing any kind of optimization, try not to introduce more debt, technology debt for
Mhm.
later stages, especially with the very foundational things like do not compromise on the security. So my point is when you're optimizing application, like I have seen some of the cases where people like optimize the entire thing, but they have really messed up with how the identity and access management roles are provisioned, and then compromise a little bit with their security posture that ultimately ended up with them losing their cyber insurances or get a
Right.
bad rating on their bad rating on cyber and all of that. So again, those are the kind of things that bring more harm than benefit at a later point in time. So whilst you have time to prioritize this, do not make those kind of mistakes. And then, yes, as I said, everything do not has to be part of an aggressive target, and always do not think optimization is one of the thing that has no limit.
Mhm.
So you could really make it's in my view, it is basically like a dream road, right? It could you could basically construct a road between Earth and Mars and name it optimization, right? So it has to be very pragmatic and tied to your real goals, and has to be progressive, that hey, by this time I'll be approaching this. So like I'll tell you, when I was migrating two regions, my goal was not on the very first month that hey, just do this optimization and turn off all the infrastructure, and then we'll be receiving like 80% of savings on our
Right.
region, right? It has to be very progressive. So first month nothing, second month it'll give certain bit of savings, and then along with that, this is just particular to the saving scenario, but depends upon every project differently. So I was studying data very closely, so
Mhm.
I used to know that hey, the telemetry is dropping down, and then the system scale has dropped down, and all of that. Let me just try with a different instance class for my Kubernetes cluster now. Okay, once I have moved 10% of customers, then okay, after 10% of customers have moved, I changed the instance class, terribly failed. System started introducing higher P99 latency, brought it back to the same instance class, things like that, right? So after that, again, when 50% of customers have moved, then I thought, okay, let me, you know, I used to have like 4 or 5 load balancers taking care of 10 or 50, 100 or 200 SNIs. So I thought, let's have a more robust networking strategy in terms of SNIs being taken care by a single load balancer, and we'll do some sort of hack work there as well, right? So that was one optimization that we did on the basis
Right.
of data plus our own experience and things like that. So again, point is keep on studying the data, move
Mhm.
progressively, do not make or do not decide to just ultimately switch off the buttons prematurely,
Mhm.
and do not set a very aggressive target on these things. Optimization has to be very stealth oriented, because your customers are not paying for optimization,
Right.
they are paying for product features. Yeah.
I think, like my next question ties right into the point where you mentioned that, customers don't really pay for optimization or not really interested. It needs to happen in the stealth mode. But every single time a new type of technology has been introduced to our market, we see, especially within SaaS, we see a whole gamut of people just, hopping on that bandwagon and just releasing
Yeah.
probably the shittiest version of it out to the
Yeah.
public. We have seen that happening with AI for the last 4 years. It's mostly washing. They don't really have AI, but every
Yeah.
platform is an AI based platform. So while we understand that is to maintain business relevancy, or to have that kind of telling that we are not, that there's always that feeling of missing out. How should companies exactly go by balancing staying relevant but while still delivering the best in class solutions to your customers and
Hmm.
ensuring top line and bottom line revenue?
So it's a very specific question towards company to the answer depends company to company basically. If the company is in a situation of transition,
Mhm.
or in a situation where cash is important for the company at a certain point in time, then a lot of these optimizations or initiatives has to take back seat.
Mhm.
I'll tell you, a lot of newer initiatives are always in a place that has a lot of happy scenarios around. So
Mhm.
like if the company is profitable, highly profitable, okay, and I'll also tell you what are the benefits of doing these kind of initiatives, taking these initiatives. I understand that people want to hop on, and in what scenarios we allow them to hop on
Yes.
these newer things. So uh, if the company is highly profitable, not backed up by a larger venture. So there's not a lot of investor play in the middle. Company is bootstrap kind of scenario, right? And then, in those kind of scenarios, I see why not. Like company has cash. It is very important, as important for a company to, maintain relevancy for their customers, but also it is important for them to engage their engineers, and engineers are the judgmental people, right? they'll they'll run out of their motivation if you keep on putting them on the legacy assignments. So you
Right.
always have to, like, I'm not a CTO, but I can think from a CTO's perspective that uh, they'll have to engage their engineering teams by introducing that not everybody is just tied to the deliveries, because I'll tell you, deliveries are great, but deliveries are also boring, because your customers, one of the customer which is larger ticket size, could keep on asking for a very rudimentary feature which is laborious but not offering a lot of learning. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to balance the suffering and opportunity for each of these individuals, right? And that's how you have to come up with some of these initiatives also that keep your engineering teams engaged, and also let them come up with some of these initiatives, and you can think uh, these can operate in parallel with the existing priorities, then great. Some of the times these things are directly influenced by a tech founder itself, so they really want to, or maybe it's their kind of fear of missing out scenario, where they think that, hey, if I do not put AI in my product, I'm going to miss out the boat. So uh, I'll say, in that case, in a very early stage product that is again not backed up by a lot of investor play and all of that, I think it is still okay to tinker with that, if it allows them to, introduce these newer things. Then that's great. But again, you also don't have to be. You have to be pragmatic as well. Like, if you have come from a programming background and opened a company, and then, that's when Java was famous, and now that you have received first round of funding, now have got some of the paying customers and all,
Mm-hmm.
not have to be, uh, you don't have to be in a state of FOMO thinking about that, hey, Java was legacy, now I want to move to Golang.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how things work. A lot of times when you see a company decides to change their technology from a very legacy, it is a very strategic decision also. A lot of time these things come from your institutional investors as well, because they do a lot of study of the systems and industry trends and things like that. I'll tell you one of the examples. Any company that is operating on WordPress,
Mm-hmm.
uh, if you do, like, take like a third party assessment company and do a due diligence for that company, that whether or not we should fund them, the first thing they'll say, yes, fund them, but also ask them to move away from WordPress. So that is that changing the technology, the entire
Right.
thing come as a priority from the people who are paying your bills, right? So
Yep.
yeah, that's another time these things could come up.
Mm-hmm.
But again, so I covered two scenarios, right? One of the scenarios, again, you do it sometime to keep your team engaged.
Mm-hmm.
The other scenario is when, the team of directors is very technology frenzy and they really want to keep on trying out new technologies. I think that is the most impractical scenario. Nobody does that or should do that. Should do that. And the
Right.
third one is, some of the time these things come from your investor itself, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's how it happens in my scenario, in my experience, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And also, in the journey towards, modernization and optimizing that already modern infrastructure, security takes a huge precedence, as you
Yes.
pointed it out. So how do you go by, approaching application security, and what kind of strategies have you adopted of late to ensure that all your projects are, sound from a security standpoint?
Yes, that's great. One of the things about security is that, so if application is already built out, there's not a lot you could do, except for, retroactively going and changing your code and all of that.
Hmm.
So uh, there are some of the things which, for an entry level startup to a mid level startup, can be offered as a help from outside. So you could get in touch with great security consultants who could help in the first version of your vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. There
Mhm.
are a lot of great agencies that does that. I don't. Yeah, there are a lot of. I'm not gonna name a specific one. So they could basically really help you to set up the stage for your security posture. And again, like you don't have to do everything in house.
Mhm.
So for a startup at an early stage to a middle stage, a lot of emphasis is on the product building and go to market. Security is something that comes when the paying customers are coming up. And then in one of the good things about SaaS is that security takes the first seat from very beginning because your customers are also companies and they'll always keep on pushing you for the great security posture. They'll ask for security questionnaires and things like that, right? And then if you have bad security rating, they're not going to buy the product. So you are basically enforced to ensure great security
Mhm.
retroactively. Again, the things that we have to change retroactively do not have to be identified by the in-house team. The agencies could help in terms of what need to change on the product. Like I'll talk about a few things where they could really do the penetration testing and tell, hey, these application areas are vulnerable. And
Mhm.
then architects or senior developers could basically revisit that part of the code and application, and they would understand, oh, hey, this allows for a SQL injection, this allows for a backdoor entry, or a CSRF token is not formed or checked here. This is for cross-site scripting, client-side cross-site scripting, things like that, right? So again, once you have that vulnerability assessment report, just go ask your team to make those changes. Prioritize it in sprints, like 10% or 20% of
Right.
sprints bandwidth dedicated towards these fixes. And then do at least for the first year or so, lean on the agency entirely. So they'll do like iterations of VAPT and then they'll come up with new bugs and all of that. Okay. Once you know that, hey, my application is this, and then this is the approach that I took. Once I knew that, hey, my application is incurring net new security bugs, like X net new security bugs, I knew that my application is built in this technology, so it cannot never be, access free or things like that. Okay, so that is where, based on those reports and study of the data, we started speaking with third party vendors that basically ensured security on a lot of levels, but not only on the application. So I'll talk about deploying load balancers. So there are load balancers and proxies now, which basically are doing XSS protection, uh, stored XSS protection, things like that as well. Okay. So we deployed some of the service meshes that were not just load balancing, but it were also doing some of these web application firewall things as well. Okay. Then hire someone in security. Obviously, there would be
Yeah.
someone in security. That's how we land on the VAPT itself in the first place.
Mhm.
Then you should scale your existing security team as well because again, agencies are costly. So you have to build in-house expertise for VAPT, uh, attack simulation, and a lot of other stuff also. So security is not just about exploiting and trying to exploit the system. It is also a lot of theoretical things, a lot of contractual things that are tied to the security as well. So your audits and compliance are heavily the wheelhouse of security people. So they'll have to ensure that, hey, my customers are asking all of these questions, all of the things are sorted in terms of our processes. So security has to be introduced as part of the processes if you really want to get certified SOC 2 or ISO
Right.
27001. And there are others also, industry specific, HIPAA and all of that. So yeah. So the in-house security team has to do the VAPT attack simulations and things like that, and also ensure about these compliances, SOC 2 and all of that as well, right? Based on the study of data, get some vendors from the outside, right? Some of the things great about the web-based application ecosystem is that there are a lot of best practices available in terms of security that you would know that, okay, if I have to sell my product, I have to do these compliances, and
Mhm.
those compliances come with a very standard playbook for ensuring security. So talk about a scenario where we are running Kubernetes or things like that, right? It is always sorry, excuse me, it is always essential that we run cloud antiviruses or endpoint securities.
Right.
Okay. So that is where you could decide to either go for a managed endpoint security, or you could basically rely on any of the very open sourcey things, sysdigs and all of that, right? Could just deploy the rules and all of that. Okay, that's how basically you are introducing the security posture. Now, the security posture is a very continuous thing,
Yeah.
and if you think about it, vulnerability and penetration testing, then in case of SOC 2 or ISO 27001, these are the security certifications.
Yeah.
So for these audits, you have to continuously take evidences that you are following up these practices and all of that, right?
Yes.
And then these evidences are 90% times human oriented. So every time a security engineer or bunch of security engineers come and they sit on a call, gather data from multiple sources, you know, and then again, in my experience, it's sometimes exasperating as well that, all of a sudden security team comes and say, hey, these are all of the vulnerability bugs. We need all of these evidences and all of that, right? It basically sometimes hamper with your product delivery
Yes.
timeline as well. So train your security team. That's where the next point comes. Train your security teams to move from the complete security focus to things like DevSecOps,
Hmm.
where some of these security things could actually become part of your uh, delivery pipeline
Right.
itself. Okay. So, like example is static and dynamic analysis.
Hmm.
So, in case of static and dynamic analysis, if it is part of a pipeline runs automatically, then it allows a lot of time for the security engineers to also, focus on the real uglier scenarios. So I'll talk about some things that you should not automate, like penetration testing, because a human is wired up to exploit a system is much better as opposed to a machine which is very like very robotic and
Yes.
follows like a simple playbook and things like that, right? In my opinions, the time of security engineers go maximum towards VAPT kind of scenario where they are doing application testing along with application penetration.
Hmm.
Okay. And less towards evidence gathering, static analysis, dynamic analysis, because these things have now become very orchestrated itself.
Right.
So just introduce robust CI/CD pipelines that do static analysis, dynamic analysis. So in our case, even the evidence collection is something that happens on a in an automated fashion. Because if you think about it, these evidence collections are just screenshot of things that are happening in the system, right? You
Mhm.
don't have to really go and bug up human being to keep on giving you these
Right.
evidences and things like that. And again, I'll not talk about a very abstract definition like shifting left to security and all, because again, that's an endless definition. But again, scenario based, I'm talking about these are some of the things that you could do to consistently keep on improvising your this thing, cloud security posture, and also maintain a healthier application. Rely a lot on matrices again. A lot of times what happens is that we have managed security and things like that, but teams are never really prioritizing uh, fixes for these cloud vulnerabilities and things like that. uh, you have to find time to time, otherwise it will become like a huge backlog where ultimately you have to shut down the product development for a quarter's time, and then everybody is doing security fixes. Don't want to end up in that kind of scenario, so keep on prioritizing it. So
Mhm.
that can also automatically happen. These newer modern systems can basically integrate with your ticketing systems and then GitHubs and all of that. So basically they'll just create a you know starting a ticketing system to like a PR in GitHub, everything automated. So yeah, yeah, do that. The-
Got it. Got it. Now, moving on from security to rather,
Mm,
another topic that kind of plays an important role in tying the whole gamut of, application optimization into one spectrum. That is observability itself, right?
mm,
So, how important would you say observability is not only within, all bounds, tech ecosystem, but on a general scheme of
yeah.
things?
Observability is super important. You like like in my view, I know that observability is at this point not something that is enforced by the industry, especially in SaaS,
Mm-hmm.
as a requirement. But I think it should be enforced as a requirement for your SOC audits also, because without observability, you can really mess up your customers real bad, time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts from a very basic things like, monitoring the system for how long it was up, what are the fluctuations in telemetry, if the system is, introducing more latencies and things like that, to a lot of other things also, like exceeding bug rate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. uh, Tied to your newer deployments can tell you really that your newer deployments has introduced exceedingly larger bug rate. And then basically, look, my point of saying is that a lot of things that telemetry is allowing, even from the cloud matrices and cloud events, to the interactions that are happening on the web, and how those browser interactions are interacting with their backend systems. Okay, what are the good API response rates to bad API response rates, P95, P99 latencies, and then the other things like, um, your erroneous calls and categorization of calls based on latencies,
Mm-hmm.
and things like keeping track of when was the last deployment happened. A lot of these things can actually help you to maintain a very, very solid um, delivery pipeline as well,
Right.
which ultimately improves your product quality and throughput, which
Mm-hmm.
means you can very frequently now deploy to production, ensuring that the system is not going to fall out.
Right.
So we have heavily relied on telemetry in terms of deciding whether our canary releases are fit to be released or not,
Mm-hmm.
because you know these systems, these APMs and observability systems, allows us to see trends of new application, error logs piling up after a specific release,
Right.
which gives us a very orchestrated confidence that, hey, what we have released is the reason behind these errors. And almost like 90% of times, this pipeline auto reverts the canaries, and that is the right thing. When we do and check, we see that, hey, okay, uh, this was actually the right reason for reverting this release.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or this was actually the right reason for sending us like alarm at the 3 a.m. So you have to revisit these things. You cannot fully rely on these things on the first day. Obviously, these things also evolve as your application becomes more mature. But again, some of these things are um, some things that really optimize your overall operational efficiency as well. So it's
Right.
not just for the application health and improving the application, but even for your team's productivity. It's the greatest tool out there,
Right.
and we heavily rely on that, not only just from a site reliability perspective,
Mm-hmm.
or from support engineering perspective, because again, support engineering also heavily relies on observability matrices, application logs, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it is a tool for us to keep on improving our DORA matrices, throughput and stability matrices. So we are taking into account this telemetry always to decide changing our canary release strategy, or how do we test our canaries, how do we mark our canaries as fit, and things like that. And I'd say observability stack is one of the things that allowed us to move from like a 3 weeks product release cadence to like a year back weeks release cadence.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's actually
So
amazing.
yeah, if you rely on these things, it really helps you out a lot in operational efficiency as well.
Right, right. Now, when you look at, when you look at companies who are looking to invest into observability,
Hmm.
as of in right now, what would be your advice on how they should go about approaching it? What should be the best practices that they can, explore to implement it to
I'll
achieve
be
similar results?
I'll give you a very, very honest answer here. I come from I was giving you an example of a
Right.
tech C founder, right?
Yes.
So, like, I'm that kind of individual. If I really have to do something, my mind is naturally wired up to first thing that, hey, whether or not this can be built in house.
Right.
But I'll tell you, observability is one thing where my strict suggestion is that do not try to piece together a lot of open source technology under one umbrella. go for a observability system
Mm-hmm.
that gives you like the world view of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And there are systems out there now. And even the newer companies that are popping up, they know that their competitors has it, so they naturally built it out.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and that's basically great thing. I have actually really burned my hands trying this out.
Mm-hmm.
Once we were building the first version of this modernized app, uh, a lot of our centralized logging and cloud telemetry, JavaScript errors, and all of that, I pieced together a lot of open source technology for it. And then there were multitude of reasons it used to fail. 30% of bandwidth was going fixing the observability metrics, which was supposed to tell us what to fix in the system, right? So it was a very oxymoronic situation for us. So, and a very funny situation to be in as well. So, that's where I decided that I no longer can continue with a uh, open source or like a pieced together open source observability system. And no offense to these open source systems, they are built with a very, how do I say, they are built with a mindset that everything they are building out has to work on every platform, right?
Right.
So that's where they're not really concerned a lot around what is going to be, what's your application scale going to be like. Is your application very bad, like super legacy, and that it is going to basically break their system as well? They have not taken into account those kind of nuances. Obviously they have taken care of those nuances as well, but on their premium cloud based subscription, because
Mm-hmm.
that's then not bound to some of these factors, like it has to run on every platform and all of that. They have their own infrastructure. That's how they could ensure nicer scale and things like that. So again, good thing. First, rely on the subscriptions when you're going for observability. The other thing is go for a system that gives you the world view of basically into a lot of things. You
Right.
don't have to go to another observability tool for application logs, load balancing logs, and then go to another system to see telemetry and alarms, synthetic monitoring. You have another system. Okay, as many number of systems you have, as many subscriptions you have to maintain, and then as many renewals you have to remember, and then you have to also keep on engaging yourself, CFO, by giving them reminders of, hey, this bill is pending or that is pending. So take one system into account which takes care of everything. It's not only just good for the overall platform, but also good for operational productivity, in my view. Yeah. So
Right. So if we look at the current market, right, it again, divides I mean, puts customer in extreme confusion due to the same thing. It's not like, yeah, well, a few years back it was just open source versus managed solutions, but now the options have, widened by one more. So you have customers either looking at, piling up a set of open source tools and kind of using them for observability that makes it all the more cumbersome and it may not scale with you. And then
mm,
you have the other end of customers, like those who are not a part of Fortune 500 or 1000. They look at observability players, and within this industry there are perhaps, a handful of them who have been here for like 10, 20 years strong. They have solid credibility, but they're extremely expensive. They require a lot of heavy lifting, and they're just not very user friendly. That's not really, their
yeah.
strong points. And then you have newer players who might have a better value proposition, who might have better features and everything, but lack the credibility. So what should a customer do to start out today?
Yeah. So again, one of the thing, if and it's a very valid point, because I have faced this thing pretty much buying every software, buying every subscription. We have to face this kind of dilemma, that whether or not, if I have to go for a credible system, but their ticket size is huge, and
Mhm.
then if I have to go with this newer company, then my mind thinks about building it out in house. So yeah, those things are naturally happening. As I said, observability is something that you should not build out in house. Okay. That responsibility you should not take. But that doesn't really mean that you have to now rely on someone who is doing this for 10 years.
Mhm.
So there are systems out there who, obviously, 10-year-old companies. So naturally, you could think about it that they would have built it out on a legacy technology,
Yep.
and that technology has not scaled up a lot. A lot of these newer technologies that are very prominent in cloud native
Mm-hmm.
ecosystem, like Golang, was not there 10 years ago.
Yep.
So naturally, the systems that we are seeing right now, 10, 20 years old, are built out on legacy.
Mm-hmm.
My mind really knows that.
Yep.
And so as others should know that it's really built out on legacy. The good thing is that community is, again, that those kind of players, who are moving at a very fast pace. So anything new they are developing, it may happen it is built out on a very different technology, right?
Yep.
And that's going to become the love language for every other company, eventually.
Yes.
That's how I see the trend.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, having that said, if you know that this product that you're subscribing to is only you're subscribing for their credibility, and again, not just credibility, uh, Sri, it's sometimes also, how premium their support is.
Yes.
Okay. Some of the people have this natural tendency to lean on these legacy products that, hey, their support system would be, amazing. They'll give us the nicest account manager will sit with us, solve our problems. It's actually the other way around. If
It's
you
far
rely on the newer
opposite.
companies, yeah, if you rely on newer companies, they're more committed towards their existing customers. And obviously, especially in the SaaS space, the, anybody, if you're committed to your customer, there is a better odd of you winning more customers through them as well, because they become your champions and all of that as well, in the industry. So again, these newer companies, who are taking care of observability, you should know that they are more in touch with the growing trends of, um, you know cloud native, or they must have wrapped around some of the really robust open source mechanisms of observability. Obviously they have productized it. Okay, so that's how I think about it.
Right.
Strict suggestion is, do not do observability in house. Like, do not try to build out stuff
That's a
to.
big no-no.
No, no, that's a big no-no. I mean, even for the larger companies, even if you have ample cash, don't do it. Because it is something that requires a completely different kind of domain expertise.
Mm-hmm.
It requires a lot of study of data, trends, yada yada. I could not even imagine what kind of study would go behind the scenes,
Right. Right.
building out an observability system. So don't do it, especially if you are into a customer facing, business domain oriented systems.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome, Ankit. So moving on to my last question, perhaps for
Mhm.
today's podcast is if you were to, look into the crystal ball and say one biggest trend within observability that you'll say will be the highlight of 2025, what would that be?
Again, in my opinion, I think one of the thing that you would increasingly see, and you must have been seeing, is how accurate the AI is becoming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think the self-healing of the systems, just based on observability, like observability be able to hook back in your system and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, or do some sort of fixing suggestions and things like that. At this point, it gives a lot of matrices, alarms, and things like that, a lot of actionables for you. Okay, uh, and at this point of time also, the the prediction of data happens using very basic ML algorithms, some of these systems that are relying on it. But as the AI is becoming more increasingly accurate, and AI is also becoming something that can generate the actions, right? Like, it could decide what to do next. I think the AI and actionability of AI around observability hooked back to your systems is something that I imagine that could be the larger trend for future. Otherwise, though, there is not a lot changing into this thing. Because again, technology is same, servers are same, the REST language, or whatever, in terms of building out a backend system or a front end system. Not a lot of things are changing, right? The
Right.
only thing that is rapidly changing is the accuracy of AI at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is the largest trend that you'll see on observability.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome, Ankit. Awesome. I think with that, I have everything I need. It was a lovely discussion with you today, and I hope you had a great time as well.
Yeah, likewise. It was very nice. I'm not used to this, but yeah, that's good to know that I can really hop on one of these and talk our heart out around what we face in terms of our technology journeys and all of that. So that's good. Really
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
So thank you once again for being a part of this podcast, Ankit. And that's all for today's episode of Ollie Talks. I'd like to thank you all for being a part of this, and do not forget to subscribe for more such conversations. Bye bye.
Thanks, guys.